Hi everyone, she told I'm Ignacio Echegoyen. I'm doing my PhD in biomedical engineering in Madrid, and I'm going to present a project we did last year in a conference. We analyzed basically data from schizophrenia. We use a model from the perspective from complex networks in which we project information from the brain to a network, which has proven to be a good approach to understand many networked systems. And basically we take data from the brain. It can be anatomical or functional. We take the time series, we do some sort of correlation pairwise between time series, and from that we build a network with nodes and edges. The nodes are going to be the brain areas or neurons, depending on the scale, because we can define the node at each level at each scale, and the edges that are going to be the correlations between the activity at each node. This approach, as I was saying, has proven to be really good to understand many network systems, not just the brain, but bird flocks and many other complex systems. And there are some properties that are common in many systems, network systems, that are related to functions. In this case, we are basically analyzing modularity, which has been associated with segregation and integration of information, and it's known that it's not working properly in many diseases. And we try to understand this property to know better what's going on in schizophrenia. From a classical perspective, schizophrenia is a psychotic syndrome, and it's a mix of positive and negative symptoms. Basically, negative symptoms has to do with flattened affect, with disorganized speech and thinking, and positive symptoms have more to do with hallucinations and delusions. From a network's perspective, schizophrenia has been understood as a disconnection syndrome in which communities tend to be random, so the normal communities in the brain tend to dissolve, where communities are networks that are areas that are working together to carry out a function, and in this case are supposed to become more random. And there are also some changes in topology where the important nodes are shifted in position, in physical position, and all in all is taken as a disconnection syndrome. So in our study we took around 100 subjects, 65 controls, and 44 with schizophrenia, from which 28 were chronic and 16 were in an early stage. We took fMRI data, which are basically signals hemodynamic response in the brain. We took the Shen Atlas that divides the brain into 178 regions, and then we take the correlation of the time series to build an adjacency matrix that contains all the information of the network. We basically do some permutation testing and a set score to know which edges, that is, which connections between areas are really important from a statistical viewpoint, to know that everything that we keep in the network is really important. And then we ran different community detection algorithms to know if these communities are becoming random, as the literature says, or not. We also did an analysis on edge removal, which is basically taking out some edges based on a threshold, and see how the network changes with that threshold. At first, we find that in average, patients with schizophrenia have higher weights, that is, higher correlations in the between brain areas, which is kind of surprising. The deviation is also higher, and which is good is the early stage seems to be in the middle between the control group and the schizophrenia with in a chronic state. So there seems to be some sort of transition from one to another. Also, the PDFs are changing in the sense that in control we typically find unimodal distributions with a peak in the mean of the weight distribution, and in this case distributions tend to be more bimodal. We ran the Louvain algorithm, which is an algorithm to find communities, and it's been used to find the famous resting state networks, It's basically an algorithm that makes maximum the modularity, which is a parameter in the network, and it's used to build the resting state networks. And surprisingly, we couldn't find any difference between groups. So the main hypothesis that is that communities are breaking apart, it's not provable, at least with our data. And also surprisingly, although the weights are higher in average for the schizophrenia group patients, their densities at first are smaller. This means that there are many things that are disconnecting, but communities are not still random, and the areas that are working together retain the maximum weights because the variance is higher and their density is lower. And here what we can see is how we pick a threshold, an increasing threshold, and we remove edges to see how the density changes. We see a similar pattern, but the important thing is that at the first point, the density were really different from in each group. And again, the early stage group is in between the healthy control and the chronic state patients. That again seems to be like a transition from one point to the other. And we also analyzed the giant component fraction, which is the largest component of nodes that are working together, and we relate that to the threshold, and we see that the early stage patients seem to be more robust in the sense that we can disconnect more edges and the giant component remains. This is a result we don't understand yet. It could be some sort of defensive mechanism because we're seeing changes in the networks, but we don't know yet. And if you want to know more details, I'm going to be in the poster number 19, and see you later. Thank you.